Hi, Blake with BlvdHome, and today, against my better wishes, we're going to talk about mistakes that I've made over the years. Now, every technician makes mistakes, even though we don't like to admit we do. I've been asked to share some of my favorite stories and the morals to these stories. Let's get into it and dig up some old stories out of my coffin so you can make fun of me along with everybody else. The first one that comes to mind, this is a long time ago, and this is a great story. I still shake my head to this day that this happened. I was a young technician, new in the field. I had to pull down a microwave off of the wall so I could repair it. So I pulled it off the wall, had it sitting on the stovetop. This stovetop happened to be what's called a slide-in range, which had a glass top. With a slide-in range, your knobs are on the front. Now, most electric ranges, your knobs are on the back, except for gas, but this was a slide-in, so the knobs were on the front. Well, as I pulled the microwave down, and I had brought in a blanket, cover up the top of the stove, brought it down, started working on it, and I put the microwave back up on the wall, and I'm sitting there going, something smells hot. I haven't plugged the microwave in, it can't be the microwave. I picked the blanket up. I had accidentally leaned on one of the knobs and turned the knob on and caught this blanket on fire. The smoke alarms are going off. I'm grabbing this blanket, I'm running it outside, I'm throwing it on the ground, I'm stomping on it, getting the flame to go off on this, and I go in there and there's ash all over the cooktop. There's ash everywhere. The customer comes in and they're extremely upset, and I do not blame them. I wanted to crawl under a rock and die. Yet at this point, I calmed them down. We cleaned off the glass top and everything was fine. Other than there was a little bit of smoke smell in the room. Finished testing the microwave. If I recall, I didn't even charge them for the repair. I felt so bad. Grabbed the stuff, go walking outside, and I'm upset at this point. I grab this blanket, I throw it in a box, and took it out, threw it in my van. I get in my van, I'm driving down the next call, and halfway there, I'm like, smells like smoke in my van. Sure enough, that blanket caught on fire in that box in my van. So I'm stopping in the middle of the road, jumping out, frantically grabbing this box that I threw this blanket in, throwing it on the ground, stomping on it in the middle of the street, going in, grabbing some poor guy's hose off of his lawn, dousing it and soaking it in water. And I knocked on the door and I said, I'm sorry, I used your hose. And I told them what happened, and they thought it was pretty funny. Anyhow, the moral of the story is, if you're ever working on a microwave or even by your stove, if you have something with knobs on the front, make sure you don't cover them up with a blanket when you're working on it, because that way you can see what position they're in, so you don't happen to run into the same problem that I did. That's probably my worst experience I've ever had. So I hope you enjoyed that story. All right, my number two favorite. Now this goes back to when I was a young technician. I'm old now, see gray hair. So this was a range that I hooked up to somebody's home. Now this was a drop-in range. So this was a hardwired connection. It didn't have a plug, it was actually hardwired to their home. This is back when we had 3 wires, and it wasn't 4 wire like we have today. So it was an older home. This home was probably built in the 50s. When I wired this range up to their electrical, I looked at it and they had a couple wires that were the same color. I said, okay, well, I'll measure these real fast. And I measured them out to make sure that I knew which ones were my power and which one was my ground, because back then that's all we had. We had an L1 and L2 and a ground, didn't have a separate one for a grounding plug. So I hooked it up to this range and tested it, and everything was fine, and went about my merry way. And I got a call back from this customer saying that her range was shocking her. Like, it's shocking you? What do you mean it's shocking you? I went out to the home and I'm like, okay, so when is it shocking you? Whenever you touch it, it shocks you. So I'm like feeling all around the range, and I'm like, I feel nothing. This is crazy. And she goes, and it's taking a little bit longer to heat up than I think it should. So I'm checking it some more, and the young girl looks at me and she goes, well, maybe you have shoes on, maybe that's what it is. And so I look at the floor and I realize it's a wet tile floor, and she's standing in bare feet. And she's going to touch it, going, ow! And I'm like, no, I believe you. And so we turned the power off. But what I did is I had taken one of the live circuits and I connected it to the grounding screw on the range. So the whole case had 120 volts on it. So if you ever touch that case and ground, you're getting shocked with 120 volts. I went back and took my readings and went, oh no, and I fixed it and I apologized profusely. Luckily, nobody got hurt. Everybody was fine. but that's why we currently have 4 plugs. If you're wondering why do we have 4 plugs, in the olden days, they were just like all gray. The reason you have that is because one, they use that grounding for the case ground and also your electrical ground. So if something happened like this, you really wouldn't pick up on it if they had a bad grounding circuit and it wouldn't necessarily trip the breaker. Well, now that's why they have a 4-prong, because now you have an electrical ground, you have a case ground, and you have 2 powers. So in this case, if that had been hooked up with a 4-prong, it would have tripped the breaker immediately. Things have improved, but again, these are mistakes that I made back in the 90s. So we're past the statute of limitations on this. Again, I apologize profusely. It was an honest mistake. Nobody got hurt. It could have been dangerous, but it wasn't. So if you're working in an older home and you're unsure, and even if you are sure and you are qualified, make sure that you pay attention to what you're doing and don't make the same mistakes that I've made, because that one was a doozy. On to one of my next stories that I can think of. One of my favorite ones is when I was training a young technician. He was new to the field and we were working on a gas stove. It was having an ignition problem with their cooktop on it. I had to get underneath the cooktop. A lot of you are unfamiliar with cooktops. The cooktops basically they sit into your opening, but the top of those will actually come off and the box will actually stay in place. So I was working underneath it and it was checking some voltages and stuff to see why this range was having a difficult time igniting. So when I was training on this, I was saying, we got to check some stuff underneath it. Now this cooktop happened to be a stainless steel cooktop. So on this, I needed the electrodes and everything hooked up to it, and I had the top off, had it tipped back. And I told him, I said, look, I says, I need you to hold on to the top, just hold it up, but don't touch anything else. Don't touch anything else. Just keep your hands in your pocket. Don't touch anything else. He's holding it and he's watching what I'm doing, and I'm taking some measurements. I'm turning the spark switch on and I could hear the ignition module firing, and he's watching. He's kind of getting intent. He's kind of getting a little closer, kind of watching what I'm doing. I'm explaining to him what I'm checking. And I turned away for a second and I reached back, grabbed the knob, and I turned it so I could take another reading. I wasn't paying attention to him. Well, he had taken his hand out of his pocket and he had touched the case that was still sitting in the cooktop, which is grounded. So instead of the spark going snap, snap, I heard, ooh, ooh, ooh. And he's like, oh, that hurt. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, I wanted to see what you were doing. I wasn't paying attention. This is kind of stressing for the customer and for younger techs, because I tell the story and a lot of them pay attention to me now and they actually do what I tell them to do, because I tell them the story before we even start. The thing is, customers, we love you and we love your stories and we love visiting with you, but please don't help us. Because things like this happen. Because when you want to help us, we're doing certain things that we're not paying attention to where you are. And if we do certain things that we can do because we know how to safely do it, now you're going to say, that sounded really safe, Blake. But I told him not to do something before. But that's why generally we ask you to kind of step back when we're doing stuff, because we don't want you to be injured while we're doing certain things. We really appreciate the help. And most of us do not mind at all you watching. We do mind if you're like standing right here and breathing on our neck. And if you go to move and you got to reach for a tool and you have to say, can you step back so I can grab this tool? You know, stuff like that. When you're that close, it's a little too close. Anyhow, that's why we ask you to step back and not generally help, because I know you can help and you want to help and it's appreciated. But for safety purposes, that's why we ask you to kind of step back when we are fixing appliances. But this is kind of a side note to it. But again, all these stories have morals to them, and there's actually reasons why we do certain things, and you can learn from my mistakes. I could go on forever with stories, but these are some of my favorites. I hope you've enjoyed watching this, because it's kind of a fun poke at me, and I'm sure that when you get other technicians, if they're watching this, they'll probably throw up some horror stories that they've had. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you again real soon.